All right, game 4 in the June 2007 LSAT. This is our first full grouping game. You may recall that in lesson 2, that game had elements of grouping and sequencing, but this is a pure grouping game. And we'll talk about that, and then you'll see at the end, we're going to talk about the top five differences between the LSAT and law school exams. So let's take a look. Here again, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner here, the official LSAT prep test June sample. You'll need to download that, and you can download it for free if you just Google it. This is the one free LSAT you can get online, and you scroll down to page 5. We'll be looking at game 4. So the first pure grouping game we'll look at. You'll see many more grouping games in lessons 5 through 20. Just go down here to the bottom. You'll see the website, crushtheLSAT.org, and there's a link to a book you'll need to buy. All of the games from now on, lessons 5 through 20, are drawn from 4 practice tests within this volume 5, these official tests. So from lessons 5 through 20, we can give you the games in approximate order of difficulty. The first game might be drawn from, prep test 65, and then the second test, another game from 63 or 62 or 64, etc., etc. So we can now start to take the games in approximate order of difficulty and by type. So we'll have a number of sequencing games, easy to hard, then a number of grouping games, easier to harder, etc. All right, so let's jump into this one. We have 3 recycling centers, centers 1, 2, and 3, and we're told they're going to be materials recycled in these centers: glass, newsprint, plastic, tin, and wood. So GNP, TW. And where exactly do we put the cycling centers? These are groups, so the order isn't going to matter. But before we write them out, let's take a look at the rules here. First rule is actually written in the paragraph, so maybe I'll just write a little asterisk here. It's that each center has at least 2 materials, perhaps more, but at least 2. So why don't I write, I don't know, how about minimum 2 per center? And of course, we can better represent that in the diagram, and we'll do that in a moment. And the rule actually says at least 2 and at most 3. So of course, we'll note that. And here are the conditions. So number 1, if a center recycles wood, it recycles newsprint. So if W, then N. This is essentially an if-then statement. If there's wood, then there's newsprint. Now, from this point on, you're going to have to get very used to a logical deduction that's called the contrapositive. This will come up all the time. You won't see that word. You won't even need to know that word, but just the idea, a conclusion you can draw with 100% certainty. Since the if-then statement says that if there's wood, then there's newsprint, what you can say with certainty is that if there is not newsprint, I'm going to write no. If there is no newsprint, then what? There is no wood. That's kind of common sense we all know about in everyday life. So you want to get very, very used to this idea of the contrapositive. Okay, how about rule number 2? Every material recycled in center 2 is also recycled in center 1. And of course, we'll put that in the diagram, but I'll write the rule out as well. So how about, here's basically another if-then statement. If, I don't know, if it's in center 2, then it's in center 1. Contrapositive, if it's no, or maybe I'll say not. If it's not in center 1, then it's not in center 2. And you may recall I said in an earlier lesson, instead of writing no or not, some folks prefer to write a slash over it. Personal preference. Sometimes it's actually easier to do it one way or the other way. I'm going to stick with not, at least early on, just so you'll get a sense of exactly what the rule is. Third rule, plastic recycled in only one center. So 3, I'll write P. How about this? How about only once? I'll write it that way. And 3 is really 2 rules. It's that one, and it also says that center does not recycle glass. So here is yet another if-then statement. Basically, if P, then no G. And what's the contrapositive? If you do see glass, if a center does have glass, then what? There's no plastic. No P. We could even diagram that rule in a way if we wanted to. How about PG, put a box around it? You can't have that, no PG. But at this point in an early lesson like this, I don't want to just write the diagram. I also want to make sure I write out the rule in language so you can really get used to what it means. So those are our rules. What's the next step? Next step is always to draw the diagram and combine the rules. So let's take a look at what this could look like. So we're going to have centers 1, 2, 3, okay. And then within each of the centers, we have at least two materials and perhaps a third. And since this is a maybe, I'm going to write parentheses around each of those spaces. So that's going to be our master sketch, and then we're going to apply the rules and combine the rules as we put rules into the diagram. So what do we have? Rule 1, if W, then basically W and N. All right, nothing to write in there, but we'll note it. Rule 2, if a material is in center 2, it is also in center 1. We will write that rule up here in the diagram. So it's nice to have it both written out on the side and written in a way into the diagram. Third rule, P only appears once. Well, let's start combining our rules. The previous rule just said if you're in center 2, then you're also in center 1. With that rule in mind, now combine it with rule 3. Can P be in center 2? No, because then it would appear in center 1, so it would appear twice. So I'm going to write a minus sign above center 2. No P. No P. P could appear in center 1 and only center 1, but could not appear in both 1 and 2. So that's about as much as we can write into the diagram right now, but combining those rules has really significant results. In game 1, I said it is often very, very helpful to create what we'll call 2 or sometimes 3 states of the world, 2 broad scenarios. If we call this scenario 1, and I'm going to write a new diagram over here. Here again, 1, 2, 3. We'll draw our slots. Let's see, 1, 2. That's an optional slot, or I should say a possible slot. If P can only go in 2 places, it can only go in center 1 or center 3. Okay, let's apply our rules again. Well, going back to the rule on P, if P can't appear twice, so we're going to put a big X, a big thick X in slot 2. Can't have a P right next to it. What else can I say about that diagram? Well, the paragraph gave us a rule. You'll see that asterisk up in the left, that every center has to have at least 2 materials. Well, what does that mean? That means center 2. We're going to get rid of this parentheses. We're going to have to put 2 things in center 2. Okay, combine it with rule 2, that anything in center 2 also appears in center 1. So whatever appears in center 2, I'll write a little arrow, that's also going to be in center 1. So basically, in this scenario, you're going to have 3 items in center 1 and 2 items in center 2. Important deductions there. Okay, let's take a look at world 2. And actually, before I do that, I'm sorry, I'm not done with the rules. Because what else does rule 3 say? Well, it says P only appears once. It also says P can't go with G, so where does G go? Well, G can't go in 2 because then it would also appear in 1. G is going to have to go in group 3. And if I wanted to be really detailed about things, I could write on top of 2, there's no G and no G in there. How about that? Not sure we really need to say that, but since this is an early lesson, the more details, the better. Okay, now we'll look at world 2. And we look at the rule on P because P has already been placed. It says, again, that you can't have G. So no G in center 3. G could go where? It could go in both 2 and 1, or it could just go in center 1. So that's our PG rule, our rule 3. Let's see, rule 2, if anything is in center 2, it goes into center 1. That, we've already got that captured. How about rule 1? Wherever you see W, then you have to see both W and N. Now, an important point, by the way. Does that mean if you see N, then you see W? No, the rule doesn't say that. If you see N, N could be by itself without W. It's just that if you do see W, then N has to come with it. So ideas about if-then statements that you really, really need to get used to, and you will get used to. Okay, so that's our master diagram. We're not going to tamper with it. I'm going to write a big, thick line underneath it. Another thing we always want to do, always look back at your list and ask, is there an item or items that weren't attached to any rule? We'll call them a floater. We'll call it a floater. So for example, put a big circle around T. There's no rule that applies to T. T has complete freedom to move around as far as we know so far. So put a circle around the floater. The other ones, G, well, we talked about that. N, we talked about that. So I'm putting little dots next to them. P, we talked about that. W, we talked about that. But let's be aware that T can float around. Now we're ready for question 18, our acceptable situation question. So we'll look at our rules here. Rule 1, whenever you see a W, you have to see an N as well. So we'll take a look at the statements, go through them, see if there's one we can eliminate. And if you take a look at 1, center 3 has glass, tin, and wood, but not newsprint. So 1, we can rule out answer A. So on the right-hand side, I'll cross off answer A. Why don't you pause for a moment, take a look at the next rule. Anything in center 2 has to also be in center 1. See what you can eliminate. And then the third rule. Keep in mind, by the way, the third rule, it actually has 2 rules in it. And then come back and we'll see what you got. All right, rule 2, anything in center 2 appears in center 1. So I'm going to immediately look at center 2 in each of the answer choices and see, does every item in 2 also appear in 1? And if you do that, you can cross out answer choice C. Now look at rule 3. P only appears once. What can you cross out? Answer choice E. The second part of rule 3, if you see P, you don't see G. Answer choice D violates that rule. Center 1 has both G and P, so we can rule out D, so answer choice B. Which question do I want to take on next? Well, we'll jump over 19 for a minute. I want to go to one that gives me some details. So let me switch slides here. We'll take on question 20. If center 2 recycles 3 types of materials, then center 3 has to recycle 1. This is basically a must-be-true question. Well, before we write anything, let's take a look at the diagram. 3 types of materials. So that means we have to be in world 2. And what do we know about world 2? Well, that's the scenario in which we put plastic in center 3. Question, what must appear in center 3? Plastic. Boom. Answer C. Questions become a lot easier to tackle when you've done a lot of the thinking in advance, made crucial deductions in advance, and also written 2 or sometimes 3 broad scenarios in advance. Let's look at question 21. New slide here. Here again, because we get some details. Each center recycles 3 types of materials. Okay, so where are we? World 2. And why don't I write in my slots? Not sure if we have to do that or not, but why don't I write them in? So you can see I'm getting rid of the parentheses, right? We're not going to have those anymore. 1 has to have 3 slots, 2 has to have 3, and of course 3 also has to have 3. And I'll drop my P down here. Question, which of the following could be true? So it's a could be true question. Okay, let's take a look at the choices. Choice A, anything in center 2 has to also be recycled in center 1. So A is out. Now with that in mind, we also have to say that anything in center 1 is also in center 2 for this particular question. So what can we rule out there? C and E are gone. So now we're down to B and D. Now let me pause for a moment. Of the 4 games on the June 2007 LSAT, this one's the hardest. And suppose you find with this question or any other question that it's taking you more than 2 minutes. That's the most you would ever want to spend on one question, and even then only rarely. So if this one or any other one were taking a little while, you can now take an educated guess on B or D, move on, circle the question if it's one you might want to come back to, but that's something to always keep in mind. Okay, let's look at B and D. B says only center 3 recycles newspaper. Could that be true? Well, let's put N in center 3. And now we ask, could it be true that newspaper does not appear in centers 1 or 2? Well, by the way, let's take a little note down here. You can see I'm trying to write a little bracket. What items do we still have to place? We have T, our floater. G has not been placed yet. W has not been placed yet. If N appeared only in center 3, what's the problem? Both centers 1 and 2 would have to have T and G and W, but what's the problem? Whenever you have W, you also have to have an N in that group. So answer B is out. D, let's check to make sure it works. Now on the test, you want to try as much as possible not to erase and not to cross things out. But here it looks like that might actually be a little time saver. Let me cross out N and write T instead. Could it be true that T only appears in center 3? Well, let's take a look at what could be true. G could go twice. W could go twice because we have room to have N along with it. And then what could fill up center 3? Can't be W, can't be G if you look at our master diagram, but could be N. N could appear 3 times. So yes, answer choice D on that question. Question 22, a must-be-true question. If glass is in center 3, what has to be recycled in center 2? Well, if you take a look at the diagram, we're in world 1 now, so you can get rid of P and G very quickly. So A is out and C is out. Take a look in centers 1 and 2. We've only got 2 more slots to fill in each of them, and there are only 3 combinations. It's WN. W can't go with T, but it could be TN. So either way, what has to appear in center 2? N. Answer choice B. Question 23, new slide here. The only center that recycles wood is center 1. All right, right away, which world are we in? We're in world 2. In world 1, everything that's recycled in center 2 is also in center 1. So let's just quickly write for world 2. What do we have here? So I'll bring my P down. We're now told that W is in center 1, but only in center 1. So what? A big X. Going to draw a big X in Center 2. In fact, maybe I'll even write a big, just to be crystal clear that nothing goes in there. And now we're asked for a complete and accurate list of materials that could be in one of the centers. We don't know which one, could be any of them, but just one of them. Okay, well, first let's fill in what we know. So we just placed W. What do the rules say about W? It says that if you have W, then you have N. What else do the rules tell us? Well, we have a rule that says everything in center 2 has to go in center 1. We're going to have an N in center 2. And then what else is going to go in centers 1 and 2? Well, it could be a GG, so I'll write it that way. It could be G's. You could have 2 T's, so I'll write that out. Now center 3, how about center 3? Well, the question tells us W is only in center 1, so W is out. Our master diagram says you can't have G in center 3. G is out. You can't have G and P together. What could be in center 3? Well, N could be there, or T could be there, or both. So now we'll take a quick look at the choices. Answer A, PT, boom. Okay, so now we'll go to question 19. We passed over it because it didn't really give us any details, but now we'll go back to it. Question 19, complete an accurate list of the centers that could recycle plastic. So we'll look at the master diagram we sketched out, and we already figured it out. Center 1 and center 3, but not center 2. Answer choice D. Before we go, top 5 differences between the LSAT and law school exams. Number 1, in order to prep for an exam in law school, you need to do a ton of reading. A ton of reading. For the LSAT, you're not so much reading big volumes of books, you're more just doing a bunch of practice tests. Very different thing. Number 2, similar to number 1, in law school you have to memorize a ton. Whereas in the LSAT, content is not tested. There's no particular subject matter you need to know. Law school exams, totally different story. Number 3, the LSAT does have a half-hour writing section, but how much influence does it have on your score? 0. None whatsoever. LSAT score entirely based on multiple choice questions. In law school, however, your final exam, your one exam, will sometimes have a multiple choice component and a writing component, but usually it is almost entirely writing. Very different skill being tested on your typical law school exam from what's tested on the LSAT. A fourth difference, although law school exams are timed and the timing can be challenging, not as brutal as the timing on the LSAT. And finally, one of the required classes for every first-year law student, a legal research and writing class, doesn't have final exams. It has a series of writing assignments, more and more and more writing. So big difference between what's tested on the LSAT and what's tested in law school. As always, if you found this video helpful, please click the like button. Be sure to subscribe. If you have any comments about this list of 5 differences between the LSAT and law school exams, we'd love to read them. If you have anything to share, feel free to post them. Thanks for watching and hope to see you in Lesson 5.